Thanks to many people who submitted questions for this Ask Jim Sunday. We got them from across the province and beyond. Worshippers sent in questions, and we really appreciate this. Maybe we will move to the pulpit mic. I received so many. In fact, I stopped taking questions about 2 weeks ago. And I got some this morning. So, no, it's wonderful. So I will try to respond. Some of the questions are quite elaborate, and I've set up appointments to meet with the people to go over them. And it doesn't have to be this Sunday. As I said in the youth story, it can be throughout the year. So if you submitted one, and I'm not getting to it today, it will be used next year. Many of the questions were duplicates or very similar. So I tried to lump them together. And on the same topic, I tried to use the question that maybe was most helpful to be answered. And the first question that I got the most inquiries about, which is also the question I most ask throughout the year, it involves MAID, medical assistance in dying. It's something that many individuals and families are struggling with. And the question seemed to be, what was the church's position? What is the United Church of Canada's position? And the question said, this is a conflicting topic for me. As I was taught early in my life that suffering brings us closer to God. First, the time of suffering can bring us closer to God, but it can also do the opposite. It depends on the circumstances of the person, the current status of the relationship with God. But I do not believe that God wills suffering. Yes, closeness can come out of suffering, but I don't believe God wills it for that purpose. With MAID, let's distinguish between MAID and stopping medical treatment. For example, stopping chemo or dialysis or just letting nature take its course is a valid choice in certain medical situations. Of course, if you choose that, do it with medical advice, discussion with the significant loved ones in your life, in an inner sense of what you personally need. But MAID is different than that. It's more intentional. It's focused on an action, a time, a place. Here's what the United Church has said about MAID. We are not opposed in principle to legislation allowing assistance in dying, and to such assistance being the informed, free choice of terminally ill patients. There are occasions where unrelenting suffering and what we know about the effect of pain on the human body can make medical assistance in dying a preferable option. However, we urge a cautious approach by legislatures and medical professionals implementing these laws, as well as by individuals, families, and communities of faith who are considering making use of this new option. To this end, we advocate community. Focused and theologically robust discernment on a case-to-case basis that ensures the protection and care of those potentially made vulnerable by this law and others like it. The United Church statement continues. The issue of MAID is one that needs an ongoing reflection and dialogue in communities of faith. It may be chosen as a faithful option in certain circumstances. At the same time, there are many challenges that have emerged since this option became available. Challenges that are both spiritual and practical. While the right of terminally ill patients under the legislation needs to be honored, affirmation of this legislation must be accompanied by protection and care of the most vulnerable in our society, and by universal equal access to palliative care. It must recognize and respect the challenges of MAID can pose to healthcare professionals. It must also be accompanied by an affirmation of dignity and the worth of every life and relationship in community. Those were the original statements of the United Church. They've added some revisions or updates, and they are: 1, that the criteria for foreseeable death for access to MAID be maintained. 2, that ending suffering due to mental illness not be a category for MAID, and the Church advocate for increased mental health resources. 3, that MAID directives advanced directives, that's ahead of time, in relation to MAID not be permitted. 4, for mature minors, capacity to make a decision for MAID be judged on a case-by-case basis by medical professionals in consultation with family and community. Lots of words, lots of powerful words and statements. So there's no simple answer, except it needs great thought and reflection on a case-by-case situation. So that's the official stance of the denomination. I'm a strong believer in palliative care at home, in hospitals, and hospices. Walton, over the years, has supported both Ian Anderson House and Carpenter House financially, but I know some of our people volunteer at both hospices in Oakville and Burlington and beyond. I'm also a firm believer in the proper use of drugs that we hear so much negative press about today in the face of overdoses. But the proper use of drugs like fentanyl can allow life to be lived by the terminally ill without the suffering of pain, or can reduce it significantly. So effective pain management is so critical. I've been asked to sign MAID papers as a witness, and I do so knowing there's been an open discussion with close family and friends about this application. That's the big one. So I'll begin with, it's a heavy topic, a deep topic, and there's no clear across-the-board answer. The next question, this person writes, I grew up on Seneca Drive near the old cemetery on West Street. Across the bridge here and to the left. For many years, I walked the graves and read the names over and over, wondering what life was like for those first people who settled in Bronte. So I have a historical question in mind. When any of those early European settlers who resided in Bronte attend and were members of the original Methodist Church, the church Walton was before 1925? The short answer is, I would certainly assume so. This congregation began in 1850 And before that, there were Bible studies, Methodist Bible studies in Bronte. So I would assume there was no Trafalgar Lawn. There was no Glen Oaks then. I would assume some of our ancestors in the faith here at Walton were buried there. Next question. What is the quick? Maybe you think of that as a chocolate drink. Talking about the 60s. And 80s and 90s. You had to make sure you got a big spoon to take it out and put it in the milk. But this involves the quick and the dead. You've heard that phrase, the quick and the dead? It's the Apostles' Creed. And we ask, what is the quick? The phrase appears in the following passage from the Creed. He ascended into heaven and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. The earliest meaning of the word quick in English is alive. When the baby was first felt to move in the mother's womb, it was considered to come to life. And this moment was called the quickening. So the Creed talks about some future date. Jesus will return and take with him the quick, the living, and the dead. The next question. Both my questions relate to the Eucharist. So Eucharist, communion, Lord's Supper, bread and wine, there are slight differences, but I will use those words to apply to the sacrament that all Christians hold in common. What took place on Maundy Thursday in the upper room when Jesus broke the bread and poured the wine. So the person says, the Eucharist is very important to me, and I'm sure to others as well. I do like the way the Eucharist is offered in the United Church, with separate cups rather than the single cup of the Anglican method, which many parishioners refuse. Let me just stop there with the question and say Walton's worship committee, even before COVID, was really focused on health and safety around communion, and even more so with the onset of COVID. The questioner says, but does Walton use real wine? And if not, can it be implemented? No, it's a serious theological question. The person says it seems more fitting to the occasion than grape juice. And we're really having a problem finding grape juice. Have you tried to find Welch's? The first time we used it again in service instead of those packages that are so easy to open up. I found it at, I think it's called Starsky's, a Polish grocery store. Well, let me answer the question. Grape juice is used due to minors taking communion. Plus, grape juice does not put any temptation in front of anyone who has a problem with alcohol. We do not want to be a stumbling block. The person continues with questions. Second, Eucharist was not done at both Easter and Christmas, and I wondered why not. I know this is the case with other United Churches as well, but such an important sacrament should be part of high and holy days and also offered in many more services, especially during Thanksgiving, Lent, and Advent. Now, one of the questions I didn't get to, I might get to depending on the timing, is about the difference between Protestant and Catholic, specifically the difference between the United Church and the Catholic Church. The United Church is not a Eucharistic-focused church like the Roman Catholic or Anglican Church, which usually have the Lord's Supper every week. Protestant churches focus more on preaching the Word, reading the Word, music, rather than having the sacrament every week. Many Protestant churches at this moment only have communion 4 times a year. Now, Walton does have communion at Christmas, at the late service on Christmas Eve, December 24th. We didn't for one service over COVID, but last Christmas Eve we did. We also have communion on Palm Sunday and on Good Friday. We also have communion on Worldwide Communion Sunday with churches around the world, which is the first Sunday of October. We have communion on All Saints Sunday. Again, we're celebrating with Christians around the world on the last Sunday of October. The first Sunday of Advent, in the end of November or December, first Sunday of December, but depending on the calendar, as well as late January or early February, depending if Easter is early or late. This year, it was very early. There's also communion as well on the last Sunday of May. And the last Sunday of May usually is one of these 3 Sundays: Ascension Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, or Trinity Sunday. There's also a midsummer communion. Now, when I grew up in the United Church, it was 4 times a year, communion. And I can remember when they introduced a late Christmas Eve communion service. It was quite radical. So when you think about the 4 Sundays a year tradition, we have more than doubled that number. Of course, communion falls under the worship committee, which meets regularly, and they set policy and directive in terms of the celebration of the sacraments. Another question: does the United Church financially support Walton? No. We support the United Church, as all United Churches do support the national church, through an assessment. A very complicated formula is used, and it varies on many different factors financially, but that assessment is paid out on a quarterly basis to the national church. We also support the National Mission and Service Fund through donations. Another question: Jim, can you marry people off-site, meaning away from the sanctuary? Yes, most weddings today don't take place in the sanctuary. It was radical. We had a March wedding here, and we had a wedding yesterday here, and there's one coming up in June, but that is not the trend. Most weddings are in banquet halls, wineries, barns, outside locations, backyards, restaurants, and beaches. So I can marry anywhere in the province of Ontario on any day of the week. Here's another question. It wasn't as often asked as the maid question. Is it too late to remember a loved one? I think this is prompted specifically because a lot of that was delayed in those years of COVID. And we have delayed grief. It's never, never too late to hold a celebration of life, a funeral, a committal, a graveside, or a reception. There are often not only months after a death that these happen, but many years after the passing. I can help you with ideals and options. Come and chat. This next question is sort of like one from the junior youth group. Why does God allow very bad things to happen so often? I.e., horrible wars, murders, torture, etc. God has enormous power, and these things happen too often. God has given us free will. As the question asked by the youth group, if we're made in God's image, why do we do things opposite? We've been given free will, and we have the will to follow what God would like. We also have the will to turn our back on it and to do the opposite of what God would like. Maybe the question we could ask is, in our own personal lives, in our lives as a nation and society, why do we allow horrible things to happen? This writer says, are we able to have multiple lives such as reincarnation? No, one life here on earth, then eternal life beyond. This is what we have been given. In the Christian understanding, reincarnation is more of a Hindu-Buddhist concept rather than what the Bible tells us. No past lives. We do not connect today with our loves of our past lives. We only have one shot at it. How do we use that one life? How do we use that one life we've been given? Next question, sort of like the earlier one. I'm embarrassed how long I've had these ashes. Don't be. I've been involved in services for committal, spreading, sprinkling, bearing ashes back decades. There is no deadline. Be in touch if I can help. So, this is another question, creed-based. And it says in the creed about the Holy Catholic Church. And we read, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. And people will say, well, I don't follow the Pope. We have a moderator. Note the word Holy Catholic, not Roman Catholic Church. Holy Catholic is the worldwide Church of Jesus Christ, around the world, in all the different expressions. Those who are our blood, if you will, through Jesus, brothers and sisters. All believers are part of that Catholic, meaning universal, worldwide faith. Another question about the denomination. What is the United Church duty of care? Why is Walton so concerned about privacy involving the Walton Family Corner information in the new photo directory? Simply put, the National Church has directed congregations and the paid accountable staff and the leadership, the trustees and the council especially, to make sure that they're exercising a duty of care involves taking steps to avoid causing foreseeable harm to any person or their property in any manner. And that's what we attempt to do. From washing up or drying up the water that got spilled from the flowers on the wooden floor so that no one slips, to having police checks for those who are working in ministry with those who are vulnerable. So the council has approved the concept. There is no telephone or address directory in the back of the new photo directory. There's going to be lots of photographs. There's going to be lots of people. Their names will be under the photographs. There'll be lots of photographs of activities here since the last one in 2016. But for privacy, for problems of spamming, and all the issues that we hear about in today's life, people getting hold of emails and addresses and phone numbers and pretending to be your grandchild, romance scams to protect our family. So if you want to reach someone, contact the office, and we'll reach out to that person and ask them to be in touch with you. Well, I hope my earlier youth story and the sermon helped answer some of your questions. I would be pleased anytime to be asked a question. Well, not maybe if I'm in Bronte Hall eating turkey dinner and my mouth is full with that cranberry or maybe squash or pumpkin pie. Or I have previously something booked. But seriously, if there's something in depth you want to talk about, such as the first one about MAID or any other, set an appointment. Come in and chat. Communication is so valuable. And you know, often it's the questions asked at the door as we greet that bring about changes or new ideas or improvements or something we've missed. It's absolutely wonderful. Someone sees something or tells us something in a form of a question, and it's a blessing. So thank you for your curiosity, your interest that God has given you in God's image.